Hi students, it's Dr. Marks, and our topic for today is what is ecotourism? Let's jump in and start with a definition. We generally see definitions that look like this: responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of the local people, and involves interpretation and education. So let's read that one more time. Responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of the local people, and involves interpretation and education. We will dive in a little bit deeper into this, but this is not the only definition. However, you do see commonalities. Responsible travel is certainly a foundation of ecotourism. We're talking about doing things that improve the well-being of local people, again, a common theme. But interpretation and education, that's a little bit different, and I like that in this particular definition. We see such terms to describe ecotourism as sustainable tourism, so it might be called that, or responsible tourism. So ecotourism, sustainable tourism, responsible tourism, they do overlap each other. They might have some things that are slightly distinct, but generally we're talking about this mode of travel. Ecotourism is about uniting certain things. First of all, conservation. We all understand the general idea of conservation, but we'll explore that further. But also communities. So we're thinking about this in partnership. And finally, interpretation. And to be honest, that's kind of a newer word that has been added to the definition. So we'll explore what we mean by interpretation. So conservation, communities, and interpretation. Let's learn a little bit more about what we're talking about. When we talk about conservation with respect to ecotourism, we're talking about something that provides effective economic incentives for conserving and enhancing biodiversity. So let's just look at that first part. Provides effective economic incentives. Of course, being an economist, this appeals to me. So providing effective economic incentives that help us to do the right thing, conserving and enhancing biodiversity. The second part refers to market-based solutions, but these are things that are long-term. Now, the economists in the group will understand the idea of market-based solutions, but basically what we're talking about is things that come out of the marketplace. So we're not talking about governmental solutions like coming out of a regulation or some kind of a mandate, but things that are going to happen organically through markets and people's interest in consuming certain services. But the second bullet says we're talking about things that are long-term, not short-sighted. So we're trying to establish these incentives where we end up with long-term results as opposed to looking really short-sighted. And finally, it helps protect natural and cultural heritage of our planet. And I like this. Focus on that for a second because it doesn't just say the natural environment. It talks about protecting the natural and cultural heritage of our planet. So ecotourism doesn't have to be purely about being in nature. We could also be talking about immersing in the cultural heritage of a country. All right, so that's conservation. The second element, communities. So we're talking about a vehicle for empowering local communities. So again, one element of ecotourism is that we want communities to be better off. So we want to empower local communities. In what ways? As the first bullet explains, by increasing capacity building. In other words, when we say capacity building, we're talking about ways that communities can expand their activities, do more than what they were doing before, have more economic activity, for example, than they might have seen before. And then second bullet going along with that would be employment opportunities. So we have a vehicle for empowering local communities that increases their capacity and creates more employment opportunities. And then finally, it helps fight poverty and achieve sustainable development. So communities are an essential part of this. We're trying to do things and create experiences and opportunities for tourists that are going to benefit communities, help create jobs, allow them to better serve their own needs, fight poverty, and help us achieve those sustainable development goals that we've talked about. Finally, we have interpretation, and this is the newer direction that I've seen the definitions of ecotourism go in. When we think about interpretation, we're talking about having an emphasis on enriching personal experiences. So the word that probably jumps out for you is enriching personal experiences. So again, what is enriching to one person may not be enriching to another. So this is why it's called interpretation, right? That what I take away from an activity might not be what you take away from an activity. So an emphasis on enriching personal experiences and environmental awareness through interpretation. And finally, it promotes greater understanding and appreciation for nature, local society, and culture. So promotes greater understanding of nature, local society, and culture. So again, it's not just nature. It involves our society. It involves cultural elements. Hopefully, through all this, you're getting a sense that ecotourism isn't always just about trekking in nature, right? There could be all kinds of other activities that would be considered ecotourism, but they may not literally be doing something specifically in nature. It could be something getting to know a culture, immersing in a local community, for example. Some sources refer to a slightly different list. So again, there's not a universal definition, but we've got conservation communities, just like we saw before, but the third would be sustainable travel. Doesn't matter. I just want you to generally understand the big picture of what we mean by ecotourism. Let's visit the idea of economic incentives, those incentives that ecotourism is going to create for conserving and enhancing biocultural diversity. Of course, the economist in me says, yay, we want economic incentives, that essentially when we have economic incentives, that's going to create real change. So we see things as being market-based. Now the economics students in the group will have a better understanding of what we mean by this. But when we say something is market-based, I mean, we could be thinking about the marketplace, supply and demand. But what we're saying is it has to be organic. It has to be naturally occurring through the market processes. In other words, it's not happening because of mandates or regulation, things that the government might put in place, but instead it's happening because the market suggests that this is something of value. We're tapping into people's preferences. So if people have a preference for these kinds of experiences, then the market speaks, right? The market will want to meet that demand. And of course, we're tapping into people's willingness to pay for these experiences. So if you have people who have a preference for this kind of experience, a willingness to pay for this kind of experience, then there will be a demand for this kind of experience. And that's what we mean by market-based. And it's happening because people want these things. It's not happening just because government is regulating or mandating. In other words, what we're saying is that tourists will not come to Costa Rica if it doesn't provide a good experience. That's a market phenomena, right? Think about it. If tourists start writing things online, on the internet, saying, oh, I had a horrible experience in Costa Rica, or the prices are too high, it doesn't seem like a reasonable value, then people are going to do what we say, vote with their feet. So what do I mean when I say vote with their feet? Well, there's other options, so they're going to go somewhere else. That's what it means to vote with their feet. You understand this idea. If you go to a restaurant and you don't like it, you're going to vote with your feet. That means you're not going to go back. You take a class at Longwood and you don't think it's very good, and you're going to vote with your feet. Maybe you drop that class and you try something else. These are market phenomena because people are free to make those decisions for themselves, and people know how to make decisions in their best interest. So for the companies operating in Costa Rica to remain competitive, Their experiences must be high quality, they must have value. So if you're a tour company, you have to offer experiences that are high value, that are quality. Otherwise, people are not coming. And this requires that Costa Rica's environment and their culture be protected. So Costa Rica has an economic incentive, right? The market has spoken. People want this. Costa Rica can continue to deliver it and do a good job. And that means having experiences of value, having an environment that is worth visiting, having culture that is worth experiencing, or they're going to lose out to the other places that you can go because, as you know, Costa Rica is not the only opportunity for experiencing ecotourism. The economic incentives are clearly there, and we've talked about this in previous lectures. We've talked about that tourism, not just ecotourism, but tourism creates jobs and income. So if you have a specialty in ecotourism and you have a niche in the market, if you're a top destination, then ecotourism will propel that. Tourists are going to come. We're going to end up with a lot of tourist spending. You're going to tax tourists. You're going to make tax revenue. And without these things, we all understand that life in Costa Rica is quite different. Their standard of living has changed because of this focus on tourism and ecotourism. And that only happens if they offer a good experience and they have an environment that's worthy of visiting. So the incentives are indeed long-term. This is not something short-sighted. When Costa Rica decided to focus on sustainability and really market themselves as a primary destination for ecotourism, that locked it down to the long term. It's not a short-term strategy. It's one that has existed now for quite some time and will continue in the next decades. This is going to carry Costa Rica into the future. So not short-sighted at all. There are guiding principles to ecotourism, and if you're going to operate, you need to make sure that you're meeting these principles. Otherwise, you cannot claim that you're offering ecotourism experiences. Now, there's not one set of guiding principles. We're going to look at the International Ecotourism Society's set of principles. It's a little bit longer and a little bit more thorough, and that's why I'm picking it, because it will allow us to get a little bit better sense of what they're talking about. Interestingly, this set of guiding principles from this specific entity has changed quite a bit over the last decade. And so because I have it before and now I'm able to compare, and I'll point out where we see some changes. The other thing is you don't need to write all of these down. That would be quite a lot. I will post them for you, but I want us to take a look and discuss them. So principle number 1, minimize the physical, social, and behavioral and psychological impacts. So minimize the physical, social, behavioral, and psychological impacts. As a tourist, clearly you have the opportunity to impact the physical environment, and you can have impacts that are social, that are behavioral. Clearly you can have impacts in all different kinds of dimensions. And so you want to make sure that the impacts that you have don't alter the physical environment, the social structure, people's behavior, or create any psychological harm. Interestingly, when I compare this to the list from the past, in the past it only referred to minimizing impact. It wasn't specific. It didn't say what kind of impacts we're talking about. So it's interesting to me that they've narrowed this down to be very specific about what they mean when they say minimize impacts. Principle number 2, build environmental and cultural awareness and respect. So again, pointing out, probably for the third time, it's not just about the natural environment. We need to also be thinking about culture. So you could have ecotourism experiences that are focused on cultural immersion and learning about a culture, and therefore you're going to gain respect for that culture. Number 3, provide positive experiences for both visitors and hosts. I like this because it's not just about the visitors. It should be a win-win. win-win. You don't want hosts saying, oh my gosh, I hate it when tourists come to our indigenous village. You want it to be an exchange of ideas. You want it to be a win-win. When hosts are greeting people, they want to be excited to have those tourists. And when those tourists leave, you want hosts saying that that was a really good experience. Number 4, provide direct financial benefits for conservation. Direct financial benefits for conservation. All right, let's think about that word direct. So obviously we're saying direct as opposed to indirect. So what they're saying is ecotourism needs to make sure that it's directing money towards conservation and not in some really windy way, some really indirect way, that when you charge tourists for an ecotourism experience, that could be a place where money directly flows towards conservation. Number 5, generate financial benefits for both local people and private industry. Generate financial benefits for both local people and private industry. Now, interestingly, when I compare this one to the previous list, there was previously no mention of private industry. It simply said, generate financial benefits for local people, left off the private industry. So I find this really interesting, but it's a valid point. When you are trying to stimulate the economic impact in an economy, you're trying to have a positive influence financially on the local people, but that also includes private industry, right? And that comes down to us choosing where we're staying, where we're eating, the products that we're buying. Those all have the ability to affect private industry. So if you're a tour company offering ecotourism experiences, you want to make sure it benefits the local people, but also private industry. That means you, as the tour company or the tour director, needs to make sure that you're contracting with local businesses, that you're doing things that support them as well. Principle number 6, deliver memorable interpretive experiences to visitors that help raise sensitivity to host countries' political, environmental, and social climate. Deliver memorable interpretive experiences to visitors that help raise sensitivity to host countries' political, environmental, and social climate. So here we're saying that you want to have memorable experiences. They're interpretive because your experience and my experience may not exactly be the same. But at the end of the day, we want you to come away having a better understanding, a better appreciation for things that make the host country unique. Countries have different political climates, different environmental climates, and of course different social climates. And by immersing in this kind of way, by raising sensitivity, we become more open-minded and more understanding. Interestingly, when I look at this principle in the past, the first part was just missing. It started at the word raise. So the first portion, deliver memorable interpretive experiences to visitors that help, all that was gone. It simply said raise sensitivity to host countries' political environment and social climate. Okay, so this idea of memorable interpretive experiences, that's a newer idea. Principle number 7, design, construct, and operate low-impact facilities. Design, construct, and operate low-impact facilities. So we might be asking there, what do we mean by impact? Do we mean impact in terms of the environment? Well, probably. But could we also mean impact in terms of the community? Yeah. Could we talk about impact on industry? Sure. So there's all kinds of ways that having facilities might create impacts on the environment, on the local community in which they're housed, the other businesses that might need to either rely on it or might have to compete with it. So design, construct, and operate low-impact facilities. This is also newer language. This did not exist in the previous set of principles. Principle 8. Recognize the rights and spiritual beliefs of the indigenous people in your community and work in partnership with them to create empowerment. Recognize the rights and spiritual beliefs of the indigenous people in your community and work in partnership with them to create empowerment. This is also newer language. Again, we need to be thinking about respecting other cultures and helping indigenous people to become more empowered. We know that indigenous communities might be on the fringe. They might be a little more isolated. They certainly, in a lot of areas, have less economic activity and less economic opportunity. So creating opportunities for empowerment, it could mean getting involved in tourism, for example. Finally, let's look at the types of ecotourism. There's not just one model. We've got nature-based, and that's most of the time what people think about when we think about ecotourism. We're talking about things that enable people to directly interact with nature, and that could be wildlife viewing, nature photography, it could be trekking. Then we have cultural, because again, it's not just about the natural environment. So when we think about cultural opportunities, we want to experience unique cultures and engage with community-based tourism activities and cultural tours. I love to go on culturally oriented excursions. Then you've got adventure. Adventure involves sustainable trekking activities and eco-friendly adventure sports. Now, not all adventure activities are going to be ecotourism. But in Costa Rica, we'll definitely see things that are adventure tourism, like going ziplining, but it's done in a very sustainable way. It creates jobs from a living forest as opposed to jobs from clearing the forest. And voluntourism. We've got people participating in conservation projects, community development, or teaming up with local activists to clean the environment. There's all different kinds of voluntourism that one could participate in. So nature-based, cultural, adventure, voluntourism. One important caveat as we continue. Being a nature-based experience, something that takes you into nature, that alone does not make it ecotourism. There's got to be more to it. I'm not saying that it means it's a bad experience. I'm not saying it's not worthy of being marketed to tourists, but simply being nature-based does not make it ecotourism. But the line is often blurred, right? It's sometimes hard to judge. And part of this is because of innovative and creative marketing. We know that there's a lot of people out there who are creating marketing campaigns that are trying to convince you that something looks sustainable or that something is indeed ecotourism. In some cases, the intention is to deceive. They make something out to be very different than the reality. The idea is called greenwashing, and you're going to learn more about the topic of greenwashing by watching some videos put together by experts, and they'll do a better job of talking about it than I will. But the idea is that not everything in nature is ecotourism. Clearly there's some more elements to it, but it can be very hard to know because things are marketed in a way to take advantage of people's demand for ecotourism experiences and green and sustainable experiences. In general, it can be hard to identify true ecotourist opportunities and experiences. First, there's a lot of elements. Now, you don't have to meet every single element to be an ecotourism activity, right? You could have a lot of those elements present, though. The second thing is we have manipulative advertising. Things are greenwashed, and you'll understand more about that But third, we often don't have enough information. For you to really judge if something is ecotourism or not, you need to know a lot of details. Something might be offered by a tour company. Well, you might need to know more about that tour company. It might be unclear how profits are shared with communities. If a tour company is bringing you to a community for activities, but they're not sharing the revenues with those communities and helping to make investments in those communities, then that doesn't seem like it would be ecotourism. Are they relying on local labor, guides, drivers, and those local companies that they might be able to form partnerships with? Remember, the idea is to not just stimulate the local economy and help the people, but also help businesses. So are they using locally sourced inputs? Are they supporting local businesses? Well, again, if you're reading about a tour online, these details are possibly not going to be provided to you, right? And are there destructive practices? You may not be able to tell until you're participating in an activity and starting to think yourself, wait, this doesn't seem like a very good idea. This doesn't seem constructive. This seems destructive. So it can be very challenging to know if something is really an ecotourism experience. To reduce the noise, right, all the different signals that you get that you have to sift through, Costa Rica has started a certification program, and it's been in place for a while. It's the certification of sustainable tourism. So if you're somebody looking for ecotourism in Costa Rica, the fact that they have a brand, a label, and you see their branding on the right with their logo, that helps you identify things that Costa Rica has certified as being sustainable tourism. Given the ecotourism focus, firms and hotels, businesses, tour companies, they have an incentive to seek the certification. So if Costa Rica is going to market themselves as being a destination for ecotourism, you want a part of that action if you're a firm or a hotel or a tour operator. So it is a win-win if they seek this certification. It can be better for these firms, but it's obviously going to be better for the environment and for communities. Otherwise, without this certification, these companies can't brand themselves as ecotourism in Costa Rica. It would be more challenging to do so without the certification. There are other programs for certification that exist globally. So Costa Rica isn't the only one. You see them all over. But there are general concerns about the idea of having certifications. First, some people question if they set the bar too low. Is it too low of a bar? Now, I'm not talking about Costa Rica's program, but in general, some people suggest that it doesn't take all that much to earn certain certifications. You can be a huge hotel and do a few things that are sustainable, maybe in the shampoos and bathroom products you choose, and in the way you handle sheets and towels by allowing people to reuse them. And maybe that's enough to get certified in certain areas, and that would not be a very ambitious bar. Other people criticize that standards can be subjective and imprecise, so it's hard to really know just how much of an activity is going on that's sustainable. Additionally, a lot of these activities and certifications are voluntary and they're costly, and so that means there's going to be less of them. Some are not externally validated. So if you're offering this kind of certification, has there been any kind of external body saying, yes, this looks like a good certification program. Yes, this is setting a bar that's reasonable. It has expectations that are going to result in real change. And then there's not consistency across different programs. So there's no global standard or no one certification program that pulls it all together. These are things that we can solve. We just need to spend more time thinking about how we want to signal that activities and experiences are indeed sustainable. In conclusion, we know that Costa Rica is a destination of choice for ecotourism. If you haven't heard that by now, somehow you haven't been listening, right? Because I know I sound like a broken record because I've said it over and over again. But not all experiences in Costa Rica are ecotourism. There's a whole lot of them though, but they're not all ecotourism, and that's okay. But if you care about your economic and environmental footprint, if you care about the economic environmental impact that you're making, then ecotourism helps you achieve both as you travel. But that does require you to make informed decisions, which can be very challenging, especially in light of attempts for marketers to greenwash their activities and their products. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic day.